As chocolate prices are set to soar, research has shown that Easter eggs could fast become a luxury item. Joining me now in London is Edward George, who heads up head of group research at Ecobank. Good to have you with us today, Edward. I must tell you that I am a chocoholic myself, so this does come as a significant concern to someone like me. But the sharp and significant rise in the cocoa price, is this something that correlates with the supply and demand issue that we've seen with more evident commodities like oil, or does it go back to production constraints here?
Well, I think we're seeing that there has definitely been a rise in chocolate prices. I'm sure you've noticed it yourself. And across the world, we've seen confectionery sales down by 1.5% over the past 4 months. And this is because several chocolate retailers, such as Lindt or Hershey, felt that they had to increase chocolate prices last year. And there really was a response from people buying less chocolate. But in terms of the market, it's very evenly balanced. We have what is a surprisingly good season in West Africa, particularly Côte d'Ivoire, the world's largest producer, but also mixed signals about demand. If you look at data from the USA, from the EU, the UK, Japan, China, it's unclear if we're really seeing consumption going up or down. And that's why prices are sort of hovering, but certainly we're in a more expensive environment at the moment for chocolate.
Just on this, does this fluctuate the demand, Edward, especially given the fact that we've seen holiday periods like Easter, Valentine's, and even Christmas, if I can add that into the mix, come and go?
Well, certainly you see that there are surges in chocolate demand, always around Easter, Valentine's, Christmas as well, even increasingly Halloween. And so it's not a surprise that we've seen a lot of chocolate consumed over the last weekend. But of course, there were a lot of good bargains out there. It's a cutthroat world among the chocolate producers, and they were really trying to shift as much product as possible. And in fact, we've seen that for certain companies, there was a real drop in their earnings from chocolate. But the companies who are further up the value chain, who make the bulk industrial chocolate, companies like Barry have actually seen their profits rise. So there definitely is a buoyant market out there, depending what part of the chocolate chain you're in.
What does this mean for the investment case then for cocoa as a soft commodity? Over the last 10 years, we've seen the price increase ever so slightly from just below the region of 1,500 to well over that at above 2,000. Could the investment case for cocoa be sustained then?
Well, certainly in terms of the price, it is relatively high. I mean, it's around £2,000 sterling, and it's hovered around there for really the last 6 months. But we have to remember it was much higher 1 year ago, and there is a persistent weakness to the prices. And this is really because I think the uncertainty about demand. I personally think we're going to see a lot stronger growth in China going into the second half of the year, particularly consumption. And it's consumption of products which have cocoa in them, which is really going to push up the price. So I would expect cocoa prices to start rising towards the second half of the year. But there is always a possibility that we're going to see the market flooded in the short term by this really good crop in West Africa at the moment.
I'd like us to touch on that demand, Edward, especially China, as you've alluded to. Could that still be sustained, the demand levels, especially given the fact that everyone's concerned about the growth figures in China and that it might not be as great as the 7% that we've seen in previous years and above that?
Well, certainly it's true that Chinese growth has really fallen. I mean, 5 or 6 years ago, it was over 12%. Now the government will struggle to reach a 7% growth target this year. But if you bear in mind how large the Chinese economy now is, it's still growing by more in absolute terms every single year than it ever has in the past. And also, China is trying to realign the economy away from excessive investment to consumption. The Chinese and the Indians and other Southeast Asians are really starting to get a taste for chocolate or for products which use cocoa in the way they like it, whether it's cocoa paste or cocoa milk or powder. So I definitely think the medium to long-term outlook is pretty good in China, and I wouldn't be surprised if this year we find it's much stronger than we realized, and there's a lot more chocolate being consumed in China.
On the price element then of things, you mentioned that some of the producers have steeped up their prices and consumers are obviously feeling the pinch. How much higher do you think they can go, and could they ever get to a level where there's just an imbalance and consumers can't keep up with this increase in pricing?
Well, chocolate manufacturers have ways of getting around excessive prices. One thing is that they slightly reduce the size of the bar. You may not notice this. They might substitute some other products in there for cocoa butter. It could be anything from palm oil even to cottonseed oil. And they can play around in many different ways to try and reduce the cost of producing it. Ultimately, they're going to want to continue to produce chocolate for the market. But there's no reason why we won't see quality brands where you're really talking about a very high level of cocoa in there becoming as expensive as, say, a bottle of champagne.
Oh my goodness. So quite clearly I need to stock up. But maybe that's the question. Is this a particular commodity that not only the producers but consumers as well can stock up on, Edward? Because we know that they do have best before dates, not so?
Well, unfortunately, chocolate doesn't keep for very long. I mean, part of the reason why most of the chocolate manufacturers are located in Europe and North America is that's where most of the chocolate is consumed. They constantly respond to tastes and flavors and trends. And so unless you actually have a massive warehouse which is refrigerated, you probably won't be able to keep chocolate for more than 3 or 4 months. So I would say enjoy chocolate while it's at this price. And if it does go up in the future, treat yourself.
Exactly. Thank you so much for your insights today, Edward. A pleasure speaking to you. That was Edward George, Head of Group Research at Ecobank.